So having a look here, moving on after that sort of discussion and on what the paper might have. Today I'm showing you the identification of works policy. Now, this identification of works is something that has been discussed many times. And it's something that has come up last year, and it's most likely something that will come up this year for a number of reasons. One is because there were some things that were instated that changed the way the identification of works policy was seen. Two, there's a lot of stuff on social media coming from SACAP about identification of works, and I want to tell you exactly how you can figure that out yourself. And then three, it's also just one of those things that they will talk about in the exam, particularly under paper one, because it's part of legislation. Now, you'll see that there's board notices, and board notices in a document generally talk about something that have been updated to a policy. When you see here, board notice 27 of 2021, and it refers to identification of works. I think, in my opinion, you should learn this and say identification of works in board notice number 27 of 2021, this is what it's expecting. This was the most recent change, and I think you should take this one into account. So I'm going to now explain to you and give an overview of what the identification of works policy is. For those of you who've heard this before, you're just going to confirm whether you remember any of this information or not, and it'll be a good refresher to you. But now I'm going to go over it with you, and then I'm going to take you to a document based on this information, the IDOW overview. SACAP have presented this information, and I'm going to take you to their presentation on it. You can also listen to their recordings that have been made available on the net, but I'm going to try to distill some of the information because it's a lot of information coming at you. Now, the IDOW, Identification of Works Policy, this policy, this document, was aimed at assisting in two ways. And those ways that it was assisting people was in that it would allow someone in a particular category to practice according to what the category is, and allow some relaxation. Sometimes you need to practice out of a category, or you are from a different system and it gives you time to follow the new system. And then it also helps people in the way that it structures your work, and it structures responsibility, and it structures the different types of projects you can take on in your firm. So the two ways it will help you to structure your work, and then it will also determine for you and assist you in understanding what the complexities and your roles of your projects are, or the role of the architectural practitioner in the project. Now, if you have a look here in this policy, I'm going to talk you through this, and I'm going to take you and make you fixed on certain points. Let's have a look at it quickly. To give you some context, and it talks about the Architects Act of 1970. I want you to really pay attention here. The Architects Act, or Architects Act 35 of 1970, allowed for the registration of professional architects only. Guys, look at this phrase in the sentence. If you have capacity to memorize it, do that. This is a question that gets asked in papers. Why do we have the IDOW now? Who is it helping? Who is it being inclusive of? Is it being exclusionary, and all of that stuff? This question here, the Architects Act number 35 of 1970, allowed for the registration of architectural professionals only. And it said it reserved and demarcated work for over 500 square meters to professional architects. A person who was not registered as a professional architect could not perform any architectural work greater than 500 square meters. You can see here that it's an act created only for architects. In 1970, this occurred during the apartheid years, and after democracy, we've tried to change this. It tells you in the preamble basically the whole story of why the IDOW exists. I'm just highlighting some parts here. So it talks about this exclusionary idea of only architects being the only ones that can do work of certain larger square meters. Remember the square meters part, we're going to revisit it now. Then remember we spoke about the Constitution, right? The Constitution is like, yay, let's make a better South Africa for everybody. So it says there, remember we had the Constitution, and from the Constitution, we had the CIDB, remember, the board, and then we said we had the CBE, the Council for the Built Environment, and then we said in the Council for the Built Environment, they have acts that are there, and inside there's the Architectural Professionals Act. Okay, that was a long story, but here we are. That's the whole mind process you need to follow in every Architectural Professionals Act. Here we are, of 2000, introduced registration of professional architects, professional senior technologists, professional technologists, and professional draftspersons. The only reason why we can all write that exam now as technologists and senior technologists and draftspersons is because of this act. Okay, before that we couldn't, right? then says now, cool, the professional that also introduced the identification of work. Now I've opened this for your reference. Here we go. Here's the Architectural Act number 44 of 2000. Inside this, you'll find all of this information, if you don't recall, inside the Google Drive we have, inside these folders, statutes, gazettes, legislation. All the documents I'm showing you now are here on the drive. So there's nothing for you to be concerned about. Where can I find it? We have it here available for you already. Okay, so let's get back to where we were. I see at the Architectural Act number 44 of 2000, and in the Act, you are going to find here that it talks about the identification of work. It's somewhere towards so on page 20 here, identification of work. You can see it here, right? So this identification of work is something that the Architectural Act said we need to have. We need to be fair and give technologists, draftspersons, everybody an opportunity to earn an income or a livelihood in this country. Back to the IDOW, which is why this identification of works policy exists now. So the Architectural Professions Act introduced the identification of work for each category of registered persons. The identification of work for each category of registered persons is aligned to architectural learning sites training programs, which are accredited by the South African Council of the Architecture Profession. Remember the word I told you about, accredited last time? You can accredit a site, but you validate a program. Therefore, persons are registered in the architectural profession based on the experience or qualifications. This is really important. So they're talking here about the Architectural Professionals Act, and we're saying that, okay, in the Act, we are now going to give these different categories of registration, technologist, draftsperson, but how can we qualify someone to belong? How can we qualify someone to belong to these particular categories of registration? What qualifies them are two really important things: experience and qualifications. And you obviously know now, with experience comes the next part, RPL, recognition of prior learning. If you haven't formally studied, but you have a number of years working experience, you can register into a category, one of these. You're not going to get a qualification, but you're going to have an opportunity to register into a category. So that's experience. And then qualifications is just a faster way for you to be able to get the knowledge you need to register into these categories. Whereas with experience and RPL, it'll take you a very long time, between say 10 and even 20 and maybe more years of specific types of projects. And what they're saying here is that the qualifications that you receive can't be created, can't be from anywhere. You can't just go do a short course anywhere and expect to then be seen as an architectural designer in whatever capacity. It says it must be from an accredited architectural learning site, ALS. Remember we did that in the very first session. And that's where most of us have studied. Okay, cool. Now we talk about here the activities of the architectural related undertakings impact directly on public health and safety, blah, 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 blah. The word I want you to look at here, health and safety. Just now when we were talking, we spoke about how the National Building Regulations and the SANS documents talk about health and safety. That's the primary concern of all of these legislations, to look out for the public's health and safety. And so I don't want you to read all of this stuff here, but move on to the next part. I highlighted the things that I think are really important for you to know. Okay, which is say from 1.1 to 1.4. Read it, it makes sense. All right. In any document, especially legal ones and contracts, you have a section dedicated to definition. Here, when you look at definitions, here's a little bit of a cheat code for you. You can look at these definitions, and when they ask you in the paper, what is the code of conduct? You can write the code of conduct as refers to the code of conduct drawn up by SACAP in terms of section 27, part 1 or paragraph 1 of the Act. And when they say the Act, they're talking about Act number 44 of 2000, the Architectural Professions Act. Right? See, whenever they say the Act, it's talking about the Professions Act number 44 of 2000. Now, in these parts here, look at this. They give you definitions for so many things, and sometimes in the paper they ask you things like define this, and you must define it by memory. Here's the correct definitions. Don't go and figure out your own definition. And although that's helpful and you need keywords and someone can assess it, it's much better for you to do it this way, because then you have the guaranteed confidence that you get the marks you need. It talks about CPD, talks about the Council for the Built Environment, talks about complexity factors, talks about A, B, and C, complexity of projects. We're going to be talking about all of these terms now. If you really want to have a good definition of them that you think will award you the marks that you'd like to get in the exam, then have a look here. Okay, cool. Now let's move on to the next one. All right. So now let's move through here. After all of these, what you might call terms, definitions. Here we are, it talks to you about the policy and the goals and the objectives. Read through this, have a fair understanding of it. I think you'd be safe when it comes to the policy, goals, and objectives. If you can understand this and mention it in your own words, that'll be good. One of the really important phrases that I can see here that I think you should highlight is, one of the major goals and objectives is to provide effective and efficient mechanism for addressing and recognizing overlaps and duplication between work identified by different built environment professionals. There's a lot of other stuff here, but I'm going to be skipping through to a part that I think is quite important for you to have a look at. Now, I'm going to be looking here at the following terms and the following topics. I'm going to talk to you about the professional competencies of SACAP. I want to talk to you about complexity factors, and then I'm going to go towards the end after the complexity factors to talk to you in essence about what the IDOW can do. Before we get into the protection of titles and the categories of registrations, give yourself a break if you're listening to this recording, and if you aren't listening to this recording and you're here with me now, let's take some questions and see what you understand by what I said. Okay, so some of the questions that I had asked just now, we're talking about the chain of legislation that gave birth to the IDOW. What you should be following in your mind automatically is we were in apartheid, we're now in post-apartheid South Africa, and post-apartheid South Africa tried to make an inclusive, diverse, equitable profession as part of our transformation away from apartheid. And so it gave birth to things like the Constitution, the Constitutional Act, the CIDB, the CBE, the Architectural Professionals Act, and the Identification of Works Policy. All of this, I will tell you, is a chain of legislation. It's a hierarchy all the way up to the Constitution, and we keep following each of those laws and rules. Okay, now you know that stuff and you feel a little bit proud of yourself, I would say. Let's have a look back to where we were. So I was taking you through stuff and I told you about definitions and that's all that nice stuff. Now we're going to look at the protection of the title architect. So here we are. You're going to have a look in this particular document for the following things. I think I just went a little bit too far. Yeah. Right, so here we are. We're looking at past explanatory notes. We're looking here at the protection of the title and a couple other things like recognition of prior learning. Here it is. We're going to look at things like special consent, transitional provision, and limited special dispensation, LSD. But before we do that, I first want to tell you about the categories of registration. You know about the categories of registration, but for whatever sake, just go over it in your head every day. You know, on the day of the exam, something might happen to your brain. You might just black out. So you have 8 categories of registration plus 1 that's 9. That's a special category up to the discretion of SACAP. What are those 8 categories? The architect or candidate architect, senior architecture technologist or candidate senior architecture technologist, the architecture technologist or candidate architectural technologist, and the architectural draftsperson, candidate architectural draftsperson. The word candidate must be taken there and added on to create the other 4 categories which you are not seeing here. So here we are: professional architect, professional senior architecture technologist, professional architectural technologist, and professional
Sorry,
architectural
Akil,
yes.
I'm just jumping in there. Are we supposed to be following something on screen with you? Because we're still on the blue diagram of SA apartheid, post-apartheid.
Thanks, Todd, for stopping me, Jacques. I now changed it.
Okay.
Thank you for telling me. That's my fault. Okay, cool. Thank you guys for letting me know. Shout out to Jacques there. Here we are at number 9 on, it says page 91 here, but number 9 of the IDOW board notice, number 27 of 2021. Here we are. Here's the categories of registration, the 4. So the 4 that you're seeing here is professional of all of those titles. We then need the other categories, which is the candidate for those titles. Those make up the 8 categories of registration. And there's one other that is up to the discretion of SACAP. And that could be for a building officer. That could be for, say, a lecturer position. It could be for whatever SACAP deems appropriate. So they've left space to make anything that they need to make it. So there's 9 categories of registration, 8 of which you know, 1 that's up to SACAP. Memorize that. Learn it. Okay. Now, with this categories of registration, The categories of registration need to coincide with your qualification and NQF levels or your experience. It also needs to qualify with your professional competencies, and there needs to also be complexity factors that pertain to it. Now, the question everybody is probably going to ask, how can you determine what an architect can do, what a senior technologist can do, what a technologist can do, what a draftsperson can do? And so SACAP's found a very smart answer to this. Instead of what used to be done before, which you'll see just now in the presentation I'll show you by SACAP, what used to happen before is you had to look at square meterage of buildings. And that wasn't necessarily very fair, because you could have a large building or large square meterage of a very simple type of building. And so why should that only be restricted to an architect? So what SACAP came up with is the following complexity factors. It's almost seen as a matrix. A matrix is like a set of, or it's like a grid or a table in which you can look how various variables interact with each other. The first one we're going to look at now to determine what category of registration you go to is your qualification and NQF level. We then talk about SACAP professional competencies. By the way, so you know, the professional competencies, these ones, is what informs your education. This came first, and then they decided that your education needs to follow those. Very important for you to know. We then going to look at the complexity factors that are important, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the building types. So now let's have a look here. The protection of titles is referring to someone referring to themselves as an architect. You can't be an architect, nobody, and we all know that, nobody must call you an architect if you don't have the prerequisite education and the prerequisite board exam. No one should call you a professional architect. The next thing that you obviously would know about is here, effective dates of policies that support the IDOW. It says the following policies strictly apply to those who register after the effective date of this IDOW. Any person registered prior to the publication of this date shall be eligible to limited special dispensation, special consent, and RPL. Now there's a really good diagram that explains this. I'm going to put it on my screen now. I'm going to show you where this diagram has come from, and I want you to go look at it yourself. Now the diagram that you can see on my screen, let's see, let's move this around, is taken from SACAP's site, or from SACAP's document presentation. If you look at it, now since I can draw over here, this is blurry, but I'm going to go to the actual document itself. It says the IDOW is published as an in-force for the following things. But here's what the IDOW really talks about. It talks about transitional alignment, special consent, and RPL. These are three major things the IDOW affects. And it affects these things because this has to do with you changing between your different categories of registration. The very important law or principle for you to take into account is this one that I'm making here in this revision cloud. The law cannot be applied retrospectively. So that means the word retro, if you're looking retrospect, to inspect, to look upon something, to retro, to go back to the past, retrofit, retrospect, you're looking back. You cannot go and apply the law to somebody that's already come up from an old system of law. You have to find a way to transition, to change it for them. It can't apply to them. So if someone, for example, qualified as an architect in 1970, and his education was actually to the degree of a senior technologist and not really an architect, because that's what they needed to know at the time, you can't apply the law that we're creating now to that person there. You have to find a way to make their education work for us at this time. So we have to find equivalence and some sort of transition for it. We'll talk about this now. But what I really think is important for you to look at is these words: transitional alignment, special consent, and RPL. And then we're going to look here at how each of these things is related: special limited dispensation, special consent, RPL. All right. Now that you know about this diagram, let's go back to our screen where we were. All right. So we hear the effective date of policies that the support the IDOW. We're now going to talk a little bit more about complexities. And that's the next thing you need to know, and how those complexities are determined. Now, if you have a look here, you see that this category, acronym, the qualification, the NQF level. You would know that professional draftsperson would need to be qualified with a higher certificate. That's about 1 year or 120 credits, or plus 1 year work integrated learning at NQF level 5. That's what allows you to be a professional architectural draftsperson. In each of the draftsperson categories, if I go up here, this one here, professional architect, is the highest. And I'm going to help you to build and give you an analogy in your head of how this NQF level works if you didn't know. Here, architectural draftsperson, you're starting off at 5. Remember, all of us who finish matric, we finish off with 4. If you study 1 year of university, you go up 5. Another year of university, you go up 6. Another year of university, 7. Another year of university, 8. And another one, 9. And then the highest being 10. So if you follow the logic I just gave you now, can you see here? It even has here a numbers. It's not correct, but here, the last one at the bottom is 5. The next one, you study for another year, 6. Next one for another year, 7. And the next one for another year, 8. But now you tell me, Akil, what you're saying is wrong. And you're quite right. Because it doesn't just work like that. It's not just 5, 6, 7, 8. Because you also have 9 and 10 that's available. So what that allows you to understand is that a professional architectural technologist is someone that qualifies with a diploma or a degree. And that person is on 6/7. And that's how you must think of it. NQF levels is not ever just one. It's this or that. So it's here we go. It's 6/7. Cool. Moving up one more, it's 7/8. And the final one is 8/9. That's how we're looking at it. Now, from 5, this is the only one that really belongs on 5. This is more like 4/5. So your NQF level here is 4/5. Your NQF level here is 6/7. Your NQF level here is 7/8. And your NQF level here is 8/9. Okay? I want you to try and memorize it as best you can. But if you're really confused, just start off here with 5. Imagine that this one is 6. And then you're like, okay, if this one is 7, this should actually be 7 or 8. So then the one before that must be 6/7. This is 7/8, and this is 8/9. The reason why we have the slashes is because in every year while you are studying your honors, for example, or you're studying your final year in your degree, you're not doing just that year's worth of work. You're also doing some for the next year. So if you're doing honors, you know in your honors, you're not just doing honors work, you're also doing a little bit of masters, and you know that. So masters level is at kind of like the 8/9 level. So in honors, you were at 8, you are also doing 8/9. Okay, you're always doing 1 year ahead of what you were also doing. And so it's 7/8, 8/9. That's how I want you to think about it. Okay, if you're confused, listen to this again. And if I'm still confusing you, write it out yourself and see how it works. But they've got it very conveniently listed for you here as well in the SACAP tables. You'll see it, and they have a whole diagram for these things here. Right, I'll show it to you just now, not too long from now. There it is. So here you are. It's showing you here. Professional draftsperson is at NQF level 5. They're saying someone with a diploma, 6. Someone with a degree is 7. Or a BAS, that's 3 years. A BAS, that's 4 years, would qualify you higher. But here we have BTech, you will be on 7 as well. With your honors or your postgraduate diploma, you will have an 8. And that's a BAS or a BArch, a Bachelor of Architecture, what a lot of people had it before, who studied, say, in the 90s and the early 2000s. And then you see here, I don't know why they have the 5 there. I think that could be a mistake, or not 100% sure why the 5 is there, but I think it's, oh, sorry, it's not a mistake, it's a footnote. Anyhow, 8 is for your honors level and 9 is for your master's level. Okay, so they've laid it out quite well here for you. Okie dokie. Right, now you have that stuff, right? I said I'm going to talk to you about competencies and complexities. Competencies now and complexities are interwoven, and your competency and your complexity, or how difficult your project is, if you want to use it that way, or the level of experience and knowledge you need to have when you talk about the word complexity, is related to your level of qualification or your level of experience. And how do you get a level of experience to match you up to a particular category? That's with the RPL. All right, here we are talking about now your competencies and complexities. If you didn't know, all of us need to be competent in the following. This is what our education was set up on. If you did a degree, or you did a diploma, or whatever you did, it's set up on these here. The first competency of SACAP is they will check you on your architectural design abilities. The next one is environmental relationships. Next one is construction technology, structure of buildings, and so on and so forth. You can see right at the end, it talks about computer applications and office and legal practice. Those 10 competencies of SACAP is what all our qualifications are based on to make us competent in that. How the university goes on about it is a different story. But now when you look at it here, this is what our competencies are about. This is what our education is about. That education allows us to do the following. It allows us to take into context different types of complex work. And so the 3 types of complexities we have is low, medium, and high. And there's an entire whole list of documentation about that in this document. High complexity will tell you that you can maybe design something for a certain size with certain other factors at play. Medium complexity is, again, a certain size, less than that of the high. And then the low complexity is certain sizes and complexities that are of a lower quality, of complexity, or a lower degree of complexity. These are the 3 major ones. And what you need to know in your head immediately, low complexity is kind of reserved for the draftspersons and technologists, the medium complexity for technologists and senior technologists, and the high complexity primarily for architects, but also a little bit of senior technologists in it. That's how they've kind of categorized us, so that we all have an opportunity to work in the field without having to be an architect. There's a number of things here, and you can look in here, and it actually tells you what types of buildings have what type of complexity, if you didn't know this already. A lot of you are in practice, you would have heard either your boss is talking about it, or you might be dealing with it yourself. And some of you might say, well, this is an oppressive practice, but it was in the aim of trying to make this more inclusive. I'm sure we haven't gotten it all right, but that's why the identification works policy will keep being reviewed every year. Talking about reviewed, here in the Architectural Professionals Act, number 44, 2000, if you go all the way to the bottom, look here, you'll be able to see all the amendments that were made, all the changes that were made to this particular document over time. There's a whole list of it. And so you can see successively how this initial thing that we created some time ago has gone through a metamorphosis to become what it is for us today. Anyhow, let's get back to this and let's finish up on this quickly. Here is what the complexity factors are about. They're looking at the utility, the structure, the building technologies, the services, the urban context, and occupational health and safety. That's what is determining high complexity, medium complexity, and low complexity. And they are saying, by default, the more qualified you are, the higher your qualification, the better you will be able to deal with more complex factors, like a high complexity building. And how do they know this? It's because our qualification is supposed to teach us enough to be able to have those 10 competencies, and those 10 competencies that we are capable of doing should allow us to be able to do complex work. If what I'm saying is a little bit too much to you, it's been a long day, I know. Just listen to this again after it's done and write what I'm saying and read it to yourself. Now, I'm not going to go into such great detail and depths about these things. But what I'm going to tell you is that you can read up on this entire document yourself, but the identification of works policy is so important that it's come up many a time in architectural discussions with SACAP and presentations and webinars about it. So much so that they had an entire presentation. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of a break and a pause, probably struggling in your mind to cope at this moment, especially after a long day. Let's see what you gathered from what we spoke about, and then I'll very quickly go over the IDOW, limited special dispensation, special consent, and some of this transition. Just to recap on this question and answer session we had, Nadine gave us a very good overview of the entire project and how this IDOW works and what it encompasses. And then there's asked a very important question, because she looked through the table and where it says the type of building and whether it's low, medium, or high. And she identified that there was almost no low complexity buildings that you can do. And one of the reasons for that, we said, was that low complexity buildings are not necessarily considered a building. It's more like a small structure, or what you call an architectural intervention. It really has quite a bit of openings to it. And so here, if you really want to see what a draftsperson can do, it tells you here under table 2 on page 13 or 42, and I think that might be page 93 of the entire document. A draftsperson can do barns and sheds, stables, surface, car parks, swimming pools, minor works as per the National Building Regulations and boundary rules. The only type of building that a draftsperson can work on is a house. And that's it. If you continue to look through, you'll see what else here a technologist can do, and then you'll also be able to see what a senior technologist can do, which is significantly more than the technologist and the draftsperson. So now that you know this information, let's move on to the SAIDW PowerPoint, the IDOW overview. Now, this presentation is inside your folders, so you can go and find it there. But what's really important, I'm going to bring to your attention here, you can do this whole thing by yourself in your time. If you want to go to sleep early one day and you want to do something that's going to make you fall asleep, you could potentially read this. But if you want to get important stuff out of it here, I want you to look at the following, and I'll take you to some important stuff in this presentation. Right. Remember, I just told you just now about the chain of framework, the chain of legislative frameworks. Here it is. It's the Constitution of South Africa. They skipped a couple of steps in between here, and maybe the arrangement is a bit strange, but here's the Professional Act of the Architectural Professionals Act and the Council for the Built Environment. The other one is really important, is the Competition Act, and we're going to talk about the Competition Commission in one of our future sessions. Here you can see it talks about the Constitution. It says in section 2022, the Constitution that gives you and me rights and responsibilities in this country. It says that every citizen has a right to trade and occupation and a profession. So this is the Constitution saying that. And then it also talks about every person has the right to an environment that is not harmful to their health or well-being, or all of the other things that I mentioned below. But here it's highlighted for you. So here you can see that here's the rights of people. You and I are allowed to have free trade and an occupation or a profession. That's what the Constitution gives us the right to do. And then you see that the Constitution also says that we must be healthy and safe. Our environment must allow us to be healthy and safe. The infrastructure must be there for us to be healthy and safe. And that is the responsibility of us and everyone in the CBE. Okay. Now that you know that and you have all this information, I'm going to skip you up here to these three famous words: RPL, special consent, and limited special dispensation. Here, they're summarizing these things for you. They're saying here that the RPL talks about the category upgrade. It talks about special consent, where you must ask for permission to do something out of your particular scope. And then it says special limited dispensation. It says, can you continue with the project you're doing, even if you were registered under, say, a different category and you already had the project, but now the new law came into place and you still want to finish that old project, which was belonging to a particular category, but under the new law, you can't do that. So you need special limited dispensation. Okay, you can see here, dispensation, it's almost like as if it's granting you some relief, providing you with the dispensation or the ability to do something other than you were allowed to. Here's a diagram I showed you just now, and we're going to read it together now to make you follow and understand what's going on. So let's look at the first one quickly about the IDOW. We say that here's the IDOW, and here's what it's actually trying to help us do. It says transitional alignment. It says here the law cannot be applied retrospectively, and it says the transitional alignment provides the mechanisms for registered principals to align themselves, to be able to continue practicing those works that are now outside of the category of registration. Why is it outside of the category of registration? Because the IDOW has changed. And so one of the ways for a registered person to do that, or a principal like the highest category at a firm, is through limited special dispensation. They will be granted this. And how do they do that? They must submit a POO, and that's not another word for PCs. They must submit a portfolio of evidence. That's what POE stands for. You must have a portfolio showing all of your evidence of the reasons why you are qualified to handle this project, why you should be handling this project, and all of your knowledge and experience and your years of work that you've had. You need to provide sufficient evidence for them to decide why you should still do this. They will evaluate it, and they will then give you permission to practice. Sounds simple enough. The next category is special consent for a registered professional. Special consent provides a mechanism for SACAP to grant on application permission for a professional to do a type of project that is not identified for the category of registration within the scope of practice. The special consent you are asking as a registered professional, not a principal, not someone who owns the practice now, but for just a professional in your own capacity, maybe working under somebody, can you do a project out of your scope? And so you need to, out of your scope of registration. You need special consent for that. Again, submit a portfolio of evidence. You say submitting your POO. evaluation, someone's going to inspect it, and then your consent will be granted. And now the next one that the IDOW allows is for the registered professional to change between categories. And you can change or upgrade your category by means of the RPL policy. So recognition of prior learning, RPL, is vital to upskilling registered persons in order to access work in other categories of registration without having a qualification, or without going to go and study another 2 years, 3 years, whatever it is. SACAP's RPL policy facilitates articulation. In architecture, we think the word articulation means to make prominent, to make evident, to make it very clear. But when it comes to education or professional education, the word articulation means to go higher. To articulate means to go higher. Even in the education realm, to articulate means to go higher. To clearly show that you are going higher. You can think of it that way. Articulate, to be articulate, to express yourself very well. And to get better, you need to articulate. And so that's how you move up the realm, to articulate. Anyhow, it says it will be determined by your NQF level or experience, primarily your experience. Again, you apply for the RPL, you submit your pool, they evaluate your pool, and then you get a category upgrade based on your pool. Okay, so now you know all of this stuff. And how do they kind of assess it? And how do they look at it? They will look at, are you aligned to SACAP's 10 competencies? And they will see, based on your experience and the information that you've submitted to them, should you qualify to upgrade your profession, to allow you to practice doing a specific special project, or to transition into, say, you need to realign yourself to maybe where you should be, because under the prior acts, it said you could do something. Under the new acts or the new policies, you can't do those things. So you need to transition. These are 3 major things, and this stuff has come up so many times in recent months in SACAP's, what you might call social media pages. There's been webinars on it. There's so much of stuff. It's almost guaranteed this is going to come into your exam. The most recent one is this one that they were talking about, limited special dispensation, LSD, the drugs. Anyhow, you can go through this entire thing, and it'll talk to you about complexity and give you a very good overview of complexity, how it works. They'll tell you stuff and it'll explain to you. It'll also tell you that the IDOW has changed, and that's the purpose of this whole meeting. It'll take you through a whole lot of information here, and you can see yourself and read more about it. And I'd love to take you through it, but you and I both don't have the time, and you have a lot of stuff to do, and there's a lot of information probably exploding in your mind, and you need to settle on that. SACAP's very nice way to try to show you the end is, this is a low complexity task, creating a parking lot by putting lines on the road. And they say this is high complexity, or they asking, could this be high complexity? Okay, where you have such a large parking lot accommodating so many cars, and the way that they move in and out of it is quite a complex thing to do. So you can see low complexity, like a parking lot, or high complexity, a parking lot in an underground structure, a covered parking lot area with multiple cars and multiple ramps and levels and so on and so forth. So now I'm going to stop talking here, and let's see if there's any additional questions that we can ask before we end off on this session.